Thank you very much. First and foremost, allow me to thank most sincerely distinguished leader Rose Villanueva, to me light, head of communication. I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation for her effective communication. Without her, I could not be here. Honorable leaders, esteemed members of Academy for Cultural Dialogue, thank you very much. Honorable members of Diplomatic Corps, ambassadors who are here, thank you very much. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is a privilege to address this distinguished gathering to share insights into complex history of Sudan and how South Sudan separated from Sudan in 2011. My presentation today will be divided into 3 parts. Part 1, during Anglo-Egyptian rule. Don't worry, I will make it short. During Anglo-Egyptian rule, when Egyptian and British ruling Sudan, war started from there, between North and South. Sudan got independent January 1st, 1956. 1 year before British left, war started. That will be my first presentation. The second presentation will be how South Sudan separated from Sudan. What are the root causes? And then finally, third part of my presentation will be questions from the ground. Now, my country of origin, South Sudan, a land of many wars. As I said, war started in Sudan between North and South. Here, what is the difference between North and South? Culture of the North is completely different. The language is completely different. The religion also is completely different. What happened? British realized that tomorrow, if we leave the country to these people alone, so North and South, they will fight. What he did, he established the boundaries, clear boundaries between North and South. So there was a very clear boundaries established by British, the North, the South, based on culture, religion, and languages. Now, as I said, war erupted and continued for 17 years. Many people died. Now, international communities, when they realized that people are killing themselves, they came in. And all of you knows, when we talk of international community, you know whom do I talk about? The Addis Ababa Agreement was reached between North and South, signed by both parties in 1972. The Addis Ababa Agreement granted one country called Sudan, but 2 systems, very unique. One country called Sudan, 2 systems. 2 systems, what does it mean? In South Sudan, there is president of South Sudan. At the same time, is the first vice president for entire Sudan. So that means one country, one constitution, one army, one currency. But in South Sudan, inside South Sudan, there is president of South Sudan. We call it that time High Executive Council. It has a ministers' assembly in South Sudan. And that was the most important part of the agreement of Addis Ababa to keep Sudan one country. Now, in 1983, so for 11 years, we stayed together under that agreement. But in 1983, the president by then, Jafar Mohammed Nimeri, when he realized that the South Sudanese with that autonomy region called High Executive Council is uniting South Sudan and making them strong. And also the idea of South Sudanese is to annex themselves to East Africa. That means Uganda, Kenya, and others, Tanzania. But here the mentality of the ruling party in Khartoum is Arab civilization, Arab orientation. And here, this created the problem between North and South and became one of the most reasons for the Second War. As I said, the mentality in Khartoum is Arab orientation, including the constitution in Sudan. South Sudanese felt that they are second-class citizens. Why? Because the constitution said a person who will rule Sudan must be Muslim. And if there is any prime minister, must be also Muslim. Here, South Sudanese felt that they are treated as a second-class citizen. These are one of the root causes that I will also mention others. One of the reasons also, one of the root causes, the agreement which I mentioned in Addis Ababa is abolished by President Jafar Nimeri. He said, it's not a Bible, it's not a Quran. Economically, the resources, the available resources in South Sudan are mobilized to develop the North, leaving the South undeveloped. This is one of the root causes of also conflict in South Sudan. Not only that, discrimination. Discrimination had happened in 1983. South Sudanese who were in the capital, Khartoum, they were deported back to South Sudan against their will. They thought Khartoum is a capital city for everybody, but they were deported back to South Sudan against their will. This marked a strong reason for the Second War between North and South. Now, people fought until from 21 years, from 1983 to 2005. The devastation of 21 years of war claims over 2.5 million lives, as reported by United Nations. The international community played a crucial role in brokering peace and provide humanitarian relief. So what happened? The international community, they said enough is enough. 2,005 people lives lost. So they came together and said, let us stop this war. They came with what we call comprehensive peace agreement in Addis Ababa, in Kenya. The comprehensive peace agreement guaranteed the following: one country, two systems, but it's different now. One country, two systems. This time, the army is two. Sudan remain one country only for 6 good years to make unity attractive. But the agreement gave the people of South Sudan to stay together for only 6 years. After 6 years, they will go for referendum to vote. To vote if they want to stay together in one country, Sudan, or they separate. After 6 years, after 6 years, South Sudanese will determine their fate. Now, election came before referendum. On the 2010, South Sudanese held its first ever general election, a historic step towards self-governance. I was privileged to be elected in that first election also, to be member of parliament. Now came the referendum, 2011. This is the most important part. 2011, from 9 January to 15 January, South Sudanese citizens participated in referendum to determine their fate, their future, whether to remain part of Sudan or become independent nation. That is 2010. And which we, South Sudanese, unanimously voted for separation from Sudan, so that the leaders in Khartoum, they feel free. They want to utilize the constitution based on their interests. Islamic, it is up to them. So we separated. The last part of my presentation. South Sudanese, those who claim that they are Christians, they stay together for only 3 years, 2011, 2012, 2013. They themselves, the South Sudanese, as we speak right now, from 2013, they start killing themselves alone. Why? We believe power struggle, control over vital natural resources, notably oil and gold, ethnic divisions between president and vice president. Now, international community cannot stay without intervene to diffuse the tension of the war. United Nations came in, IGAD, AU, EU, UK, US, Norway. Because here, UK and US, Norway, this we call them Troika. But also, we are there, IGAD and AU, Africa Union. IGAD means Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD. Some of you knows. And AU, Africa Union. They came together to resolve the case between South Sudanese and South Sudanese, between president and his vice president. Of course, all of you knows now under vice president, first vice president is under arrest. But let me come to that. Now, the agreement in Addis Ababa provide, because it is power struggle, everybody want to be the president. What happened? The community, the international community said, you will be first vice president, and this vice president, and this vice president, this vice president. 5 vice presidents in South Sudan. It does not happen anywhere. It is unique. 5 vice, as we speak right now, 5 vice presidents. Have you ever heard one president, 5 vice presidents? It is not happening anywhere. They said because we need peace to come to South Sudan. Now, the first vice president, as we speak, is now in the court. Is now in the court. He was under house arrest for 3 years, for 3 months or more than 3 months since March. But 5 days ago, is now in court. It's now in court. Vice President. Remain how many Vice President? How many? 4. It's unique, isn't it? It's unique. So for that reason, I better stop here and to allow some questions if we have them.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And you announced already that there is a third part, which is the Q&A. So who feels like asking a question? We have one in the back.
Thank you, Honorable.
Yeah.
Once an MP, always an MP. Yeah. The situation in Sudan personally has been of great interest to me. One of my term papers last year, when I was doing my MPhil Human Rights, was on the crisis between the Janjaweed or the situation going on in Eastern Darfur.
Yeah.
But first comment I would like to make is that the British or European influence in Africa has been mostly divisive after they left. In the Western coast, or the countries that have Atlantic Ocean, you'll see that the first contact with the Europeans are those populations living on the coast. And along the line, they were more developed in terms of education, infrastructure, than those countries living in the Sahel. And that difference even persists until today in terms of lack of development in countries in the hinterland. The same thing, I believe, happens in Sudan. The Arab North, because of the British Egyptian incursions, that's the first contact they had, and so they are more influential in terms of development, education, and all that, and to the detriment of the southern Sudanese population. But now there are 2 questions I want to ask. The first, do you think that President Salva Kiir should resign? He's one of the oldest presidents in Africa. And like you rightly mentioned, everybody wants to be president. And they want to be president until they die. Even in the grave, they want to be president. I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in Africa. Clinging to power and thinking that there is no one else who is better placed to rule the country than them. So Salva Kiir, he did great by liberating South Sudan, but it's time for him to go.
Yeah.
I am being blunt because I feel safe to talk here. So do you think that it's time for him to go? And what is going to be the strategy to ensure that perhaps the remaining 4 vice presidents, they go into competitive elections, free and fair and transparent, to allow the South Sudanese people to vote? Yeah. Because if they are struggling for power, for resources, the war will continue. And I remember it was in 2003 or so, during the tenure of the late UN Secretary General Kofi Annan, that the crisis in Sudan, especially the war between the 2 sides, triggered what we call the responsibility to protect. But now, the leaders in South Sudan are also part of the problem. If the war continues forever, the people, the commonness, will not be able to benefit from peace. So what is your perspective in that respect? Making sure that there is a free environment for elections, one leader and his vice to lead the country into a peaceful era. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are expecting next year to have election. But unfortunately, election always comes when there is peace in the country. Right now, as we speak, people are dying. The war is going on. There are so many oppositions who have taken arms. They are fighting now in South Sudan. Do you think election will be there? For Salva Kiir to go, everybody wants him to go home. He has done a lot of things. He liberated the country. He should go home now. But I do not know what prevents him to go home. That's a problem. That's a problem. You have mentioned Janjaweed. But Janjaweed, there's another war. I never touched it. It is on that side of the north. The north also, North Sudan, are fighting seriously between Janjaweed, as you mentioned, and the government of Sudan. That's another issue. They are killing themselves. They divided even country into two. The country called Sudan, not South Sudan now. The country called Sudan, it is already divided into two, between Janjaweed and the government of Sudan. And now as we speak, the capital, Khartoum, where I graduated, is not there. It's almost destroyed. It's almost destroyed. They shifted the capital, the government shifted the capital to Port Sudan. And the Janjaweed, they went to the west. Now the center here, that's happening.
I think we can still take one, maybe two, but we have already our distinguished next speaker, so you will be next.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Noor Khafaji. I'm from the United States. One of my closest childhood friends, her name is Shadan Al-Azraq. She has dedicated basically her life now to wanting to help as much as she can, being of privileged Western descent, to help the humanitarian crisis and shed light on the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Sudan. She has a question for you specifically that she just sent to me, and I'll ask that in her words. How can those of us living within the imperial center align ourselves with international movements to begin dismantling the exploitative capitalist system of the United States and instead build a cooperative global economic order rooted in justice, sovereignty, and solidarity for Sudan? Thank you.
Also, it's a statement.
A moment. Unfortunately, the question is about Sudan.
Yes,
It's not about South Sudan.
Yes, it's for South Sudan, but as a Western audience, how can us using our privilege help shed light on that more so?
So basically, at the moment, because of this crisis, is very difficult to advise. It is very difficult to advise because there is no control in the north or even in the south. It's only Juba, in the capital Juba, you can say something. But in the north now, the situation is untold. I cannot.
Okay, thank you. My name is Valérie Anchang. I'm from Cameroon. It's not a question, but it's a doléance. It will be addressed to Dr. Ubi, if I'm not making a mistake. Sorry. Sudan is facing a humanitarian crisis, and I want to plead with you because your voice is being heard at the European Union Parliament. We saw the energy the European country, the Western country, deployed to help Ukraine. We saw the energy they deployed to help different countries in the world when they have problems. But Africa is always different. We don't know why. In fact, we understand. So please, I want to plead with you that the European Union, the Western countries, should think on how they can really, willfully, and genuinely help Sudan with the humanitarian crisis, because people, they are dying, they're suffering. I used to watch the press, the news, and what I see is terrible. So that's just a doléance. Thank you.
It would be another lecture to address this properly. And apologies that I got the question, but that's what happens here. When we try to find an answer to a question like this, we have to look at the nature of the organization. And the European Union is not a state. And therefore they haven't centralized competences that would be necessary to give a proper response to the situation on the ground in this country or the previous examples in the previous presentation. So what the European Union can bring to the table is economic sanctions, but they cannot really bring much to the table in terms of military force, which is kind of a response to your presentation on, is what Trump is doing a response to world peace? which methodologically is a question like, is an elephant a camel? And then the answer is no, but the question is, does it help us to compare things that are not really comparable? So the common denominator between your question and her question is that it excludes the interest dimension of it. So when we judge the European Union for its commitment to values and principles, then yes, the European Union should do everything possible to stop the killing and the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan or in Sudan as such.
Yeah.
When we look at what they can bring to the table, there's a fundamental difference between what the United States could bring to the table and what drives the President of the United States to make use of its military force. So when we think of something like a situation in which a 10th grader watches two 5th graders having a fight in a schoolyard, he could use his strength to stop it. And that's a form of peacekeeping as an initial response to stop the use of violence. This is different from peace. This is, in the best possible case of using a metaphor, a ceasefire, but it doesn't stop the root cause. And when we look at the situation in Sudan, the Europeans have certainly a responsibility for what's happening on the ground because of everything you explained about the history and the root cause of the conflict. But what they can practically do to stop the killing, if there is an interest of the different actors involved to use storytelling to fuel the conflict because that keeps them in power, that is very limited. Because if everyone would be driven by a liberal idea of it's against my economic interest and therefore I stop the killing because I lose a market or I lose foreign direct investment or whatever economic motivation, then economic sanctions could make a difference. But if this is not your motivation because you are on a mission or you have an ideology or you simply look at short-term benefits, then you couldn't care less what the GDP consequences are. This is the situation with European sanctions against Russia. And so the only possible way for self-defense of the Europeans is to help with everything they can possibly do to help Ukraine, to defend Ukraine, because if Ukraine falls, the next former Soviet republic or a member of the influential zone of the former Soviet Union would be next. So the motivation is a very different, closeness is a very different question, cultural proximity is very different, and that explains why the European Union is acting differently from what you would wish for or what the case of Sudan urgently needs. We can elaborate this later in a more private setting, but for the sake of timing, join me in a round of applause for our speaker.